From the studio of Take One, this is White Space, a space for ordinary people to share their experiences on common human emotions. I'm your host, Susan Angami, and welcome to this episode. In this episode on grief, we have 37-year-old Magdalena from Sweden, who writes about experiencing grief through different circumstances. She has titled her essay, Going Back to Grieving, and hopes that her story would show that grief bears good fruit if it is lived and not avoided. To read her essay, we have in our studio Christine Iralu from Zubza, a housewife and a member of the Initiatives of Change. Here is Going Back to Grieving.
One of my favorite songs starts with the words, falling back to grieving. And maybe one of the reasons I like it so much is that for the most part of my life, I found myself doing exactly this, falling back to grieving regularly. Grieving, sadness, and emptiness accompanied me since I can remember, long before I understood what the things I lost are. For years, I struggled with suicidal thoughts and the feeling of being unworthy to live. I felt as if someone had commanded me to live with a huge black hole instead of a soul. Joy was rarely my guest, and I grew up with a pending sense of doom. It took me years to understand that it was a natural reaction to what had happened to me as a child. I grew up in a devoted Christian family, and my parents were often absent because they were evangelizing. As I was a very sensitive child, I was taking it as badly as possible. I had problems sleeping and was troubled by nightmares. I was always anxious, and only in my 30s did I understand that stomachache and nausea are not normal feelings that have to accompany me for most of the time. I was so stressed as a child that I completely lost touch with my needs. The constant deprivation of the presence, affection, and support of my parents was justified by big slogans of making sacrifices for God and accepting the cross, something that all good Christians should do. I learnt that one does not have the right to have needs, and the basis for my relations to others is my sacrifice. It was me to cater to others' needs, show flexibility, and welcome their shortcomings with patience. But I wasn't allowed to express or even define my boundaries and needs. You can imagine how much pain and frustration it caused, but it went unnamed. I didn't even know what the missing element was. It was grief. I lost a huge part of my childhood to the mission my parents had decided to undertake. But as the loss went unrecognized and unacknowledged, instead of grief, I faced depression. I carried inside me emptiness. I felt something huge was ripped apart from me, but I couldn't say what it was. I just didn't know how to be happy. In my mid-30s, I started therapy. Thanks to this, I realized what the problem was and allowed myself to both be angry and fall back to grieving my losses. I am sharing this part of my story to show what can happen when we don't realize our losses and don't allow ourselves to grieve. Interestingly, I had a very different experience of grief when my mum was dying. I was 15 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and since the beginning, I had this gut feeling that she was going to die. She did, after almost 5 years of fighting cancer. During this time, I was finishing my high school and appearing for the entrance exam to enter university. My main exam was a day before her funeral. For her death, I allowed myself to grieve, while knowing that I was responsible for my younger brother and needed to stay active and alert at the same time. A psychologist whom I had befriended told me, "You need to cry anytime you need, as much as you can. Otherwise, you will enter into depression." So I cried and prayed. My mum's death was the strongest experience of the spiritual realm and resurrection that I ever had. And the grief came, but it also passed. This experience never became a burden, but rather a source of resilience for my entire adulthood. Grief for me is also unavoidably linked to romantic relationships. I am now on the wrong side of 5 and 30, as Jane Austen described Colonel Brandon, and I have spent the past 20 years looking for the love of my life. The result is quite unimpressive. I started praying for a good husband when I was 15. Last summer, after 22 years of praying every day for this, I decided to stop. The stories I could tell about the men I was dating could easily fill a few hundred pages. They all fall under the category of tragic comedy. I kept asking myself, what was wrong with me to make such bad choices? How do other women manage to find good life partners? How would I find someone who agrees to my system of values? The last person I dated was charming, sharp, and sensitive. I met him after an ugly breakup, and the problem was that I simply didn't have the space in me for anyone new. I just wanted to prove to myself that I was moving on. It didn't work out. I offended someone genuinely nice. I just saw him a few days ago, 9 months since we broke up, and here I am again with my old companion. Grief. I know that where the two of us are right now, nothing can happen between us, and yet, somewhere deep down, he feels like home. There is nothing more obvious and painful at the same time than letting him go. It feels like I have lost something. So I let myself grieve this loss and hope to be wiser in the future.
That was Going Back to Grieving, written by Magdalena and read to us by Christine Iralu. We asked Christine about her thoughts on the essay, and this is what she has to say.
My initial response was, gosh, I don't think I would have the courage to write the truth that she has expressed. The thing that struck me very much about Magdalena's honesty is that her assessment that crying is okay, grieving is okay. And that actually became her strength for her future. And to realize, as she did, that pain will never disappear from our lives. But honest sharing about what we feel deep down, whether it's good or bad, will bring healing and can even bring happiness.
Christine also shared about experiencing grief when she lost her mother.
We can never tell what grief is going to be until we experience it. And of course, it was terribly painful, saying goodbye to her and not wanting her to go, because I could see she was actually leaving. And I wanted to hold her back, but I knew that she was going to a better place. And therefore I said, "Mommy, go and be happy." I remember those words. You must go. So that relieved her.
I think that Christine and Magdalena's stories are about consciously letting go. Magdalena, in her essay, captures circumstances in her life, an unhappy childhood, the death of her mother, and of failed relationships, and in all of them, she has learned to grieve the loss. Life is so precious because it is deadly serious and also breathtakingly beautiful. The best we can do is embrace both grief and joy simultaneously. White Space is a production of Take One. It is written and directed by Nitonyo Tongoy and Sesino Hyoshe. The essay for this episode was edited by Katayinla Jamir and sound recorded by Kediokrityo Satse. Signature tune is by Nurhe Kate, original score by Tizon Yeka, and the art piece for White Space created by Limatola Longcomer. I'm Susan Angami. Thanks for listening.